As amazing as stories and sightings of mysterious creatures are, there's no doubt that they sometimes go a little too far off the rails. What starts as something strange, believable, quickly becomes utterly bizarre and so absurd that they defy categorisation and leave you scratching your head. One story that occupies this realm of strangeness and absurdity are those periodic cases of what could only be described as a living amorphous blob. There are more reports of these blob creatures than you might think. These are 4 of the strangest ones out there. Number 4. The Philadelphia police encounter. One of the weirdest encounters with an animated blob was detailed in the Frank Edwards book Strange World. The story is said to have taken place in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in September 1950. The story is also notable for being experienced by not just one person, but 4 veteran police officers, people that can be trusted to not make up something like this. The first witnesses to the creature were officers John Collins and Joe Keenan. They were on patrol when they came around a corner on a quiet street and found themselves face to face with a kind of globular mass. The mass glittered under the headlights of their car and appeared to be heaving itself towards a nearby field off the road. The confused officers stopped the car to get out and investigate what they saw. They discovered a large aggregation of what seemed to be a purple gelatinous substance that was outwardly spread about 6 feet and was about 1 foot in height. The creature pulsated, vibrated, and glistened under their flashlights as it had the headlights. Something really strange about the incident in that the blob was supposedly emitting a faint glow when the officers turned their flashlights off. It appeared to be bioluminescent and released its own light. Given the way it moved and that it appeared to have some kind of thick lip, the officers thought that it was some sort of living creature, though they had no idea what manner of creature it might be. As the mass continued to move on, the officers called for backup. Their backup came in the form of Sergeant Joe Cook and Officer James Cooper. These were the second 2 officers to see the mass for themselves. At some point, the men decided to attempt lifting the blob. This was something they should definitely have reconsidered given how little they knew of the blob. Nevertheless, they allegedly surrounded the creature and tried to raise it off the ground. The blob became even more amazing when they discovered it wasn't a solid mass after all. It seemed to disintegrate as they tried to handle it, leaving on their hands some sort of odourless scum residue. It's not known if their touch caused a negative effect on the creature, but it was then that the blob started to evaporate as they continued to watch it. The creature faded away and left behind a damp patch of ground. Unfortunately, the officers either didn't think they should take a sample of the thing, or they just didn't have the courage. So the only thing we have is their bizarre tale. Number 3. The Domston blobs. The next account is regarded as one of the weirdest and most violent blob reports out there. Another incident from the 50s. The encounter details particularly aggressive gelatinous beings which apparently seem to be some kind of intelligent alien life form. It comes from the book Strangest from the Skies by late author Brad Steger and tells the story of Hans Gustafsson and 30-year-old Stig Rydberg. On December the 20th, 1958, the pair were travelling along Route 45 from Höganäs to Helsingborg in Sweden during the early hours of the morning. The route was foggy and they decided to pull over due to the low visibility. As they walked around outside of the car, they saw some kind of glowing coming through the fog, apparently out of a nearby surrounding forest. The friends decided to take a hike into the darkened trees to see what was causing the light and where it was coming from. They got around 150 feet into the woods when they allegedly found the source of the glow. It would prove to be much more bizarre than it may have expected. What they found was some sort of disc-like object that rested on two legs and was around 2 feet long. The disc was emitting a range of ever-changing colours. What was weirder than the appearance of the flying saucer was what they could see in the surrounding area. 3 foot long, limbless, faceless, amorphous blobs that Rydberg describes as being like globs of animated jelly levitating above the ground. Things would quickly become tense when these same beings surrounded the men and reportedly began engulfing their limbs in their throbbing masses. The pair describe it as feeling like magnetic dough that gave off a terrible stench like burnt sausage and ether. It appeared as if the creatures were attempting to drag their frightened witnesses towards the saucer. No matter how much the men attempted to fight back and struggle, their efforts seemed futile. It was purely by chance that Rydberg was able to tear himself away from the creature and run back to the car, the alien blobs hot on his tail. Rydberg reached the car and leaned on the horn, piercing the cool night with a massive noise to hopefully draw the attention of anyone nearby. It also appeared to have the effect of startling the creature long enough for them to let go of Gustafsson. The blobs came together under the craft, filed their way inside, and took off into the night sky. The ship gave off a screeching blare, leaving behind nothing but a terrible smell and 2 confused and frightened men who had mysterious cuts and bruises. It's somewhat understandable that the 2 men would keep the story to themselves for such a long time, but the story eventually made its way out and became something of a sensation in Sweden. The men were interviewed by police, and while the story seemed completely bizarre and impossible, no one was able to find any evidence of a hoaxing. The men were even monitored in secret, but never let on that they were tricking anyone or lying. Rydberg and Gustafsson were examined and found to be in good mental and physical health. In the end, the police concluded that, real or not, the men were traumatised by whatever it was they had seen. Whatever it was they believed they had seen, it's difficult to fathom, and we'll likely never know, as there have been no other accounts of these creatures since. Number 2. The Kinderhook blob. The next report of a living blob comes from New York in the 1960s and was told by 10-year-old boy Bruce Hallenbeck from Kinderhook, New York in 1962. The boy claimed that he was out in the woods with his cousin when they were startled by a high-pitched whistling which seemed to emanate from all directions. They looked around to find the source of the noise, and Hallenbeck alleges that he spotted a white, blob-like creature hidden behind a tree. While it looked like the creature was looking at the boys, it didn't appear to have any noticeable facial features. The boys were so terrified by what they had seen that they ran away as fast as their legs could carry them. Interestingly enough, Hallenbeck would go on to become a paranormal researcher. He noted the encounter he had had in the book, Monsters of the Northwoods. This wouldn't be the last time that the mysterious white blob showed up. There was another report, apparently of the same creature, in 1964. The witness was never named, but claimed that he had been hiking in the same area as the boys when he spotted a large white blob floating down a hill. Most frighteningly, he recounted, is that upon capturing the creature's attention, it appeared to move closer towards him. The witness ran away as fast as possible and came back to the scene later on with a friend to investigate. The boys were armed with a pitchfork and a shovel to fight back against the possibly aggressive creature. They soon found the creature again and saw the white mass floating between the trees. The sight of the gruesome creature unnerved the boys enough to convince them not to confront it, who instead ran back to town to tell their amazing story. There was another sighting that may or not be connected to the so-called Kinderhook blob, which came a few years later from 14-year-old witnesses Russell Lee and Barry Scott. The two were alleged to have been out camping in a tent when they heard a sound coming from outside. They looked out to see what appeared to be some kind of indistinct white blob among the trees. This case is a little different from the others, as the creature started congealing to form an identifiable shape. What shape it was depends on which witness you ask. One of the boys described it as looking like a white bell-shaped entity, while the other described it as being the actual Virgin Mary. Whichever one you believe, it's certainly bizarre. No matter what the creature was or what it looked like, it soon dissolved into the forest. What manner of creature had the boys seen, and was it really connected to the earlier two reports? No one knows for sure, and the mystery of the blob of Kinderhook lives on. Number 1. The Florida Beach Mass Sighting. One of the most recent reports of a blob creature comes from Thought Co. It was made by a witness going by the name of Adam G., who claimed to have had a strange encounter during the summer of 1995. Adam was 9 years old at the time and was on a family trip to Florida Beach. Not much happened during his stay at the beach, and everything seemed run-of-the-mill, until the beachgoers suddenly became very excited and pointed towards an empty part of the beach, exclaiming, "What is that?" Adam describes what happened next in his own words. "We all got up to get a better look, very quickly forming a crowd around it. If I had to describe the creature, we saw it in one word, and that word would be cartoonish. I will never forget what it looked like. It was green and looked like a ball of slime about the size of a basketball. It had tentacles resting on the ground around it, with two longer tail-like tentacles sticking out of its back. The thing that was the most bizarre and made it look cartoonish were its eyes, which were on stalks that stood about a foot off its body. The eyes looked creepily human and just looked at us in an almost disinterested way. The other strange thing about it was its mouth, which never seemed to close, and where you'd expect teeth were tooth-shaped fleshy protrusions. No one, not even the creature, seemed scared, and after a while it lazily slithered back into the ocean. There were roughly 10 witnesses to this thing, and we all spent most of our time talking about what it must have been. One idea was that it was a parasite organism for a much larger creature. One also possibly never identified. Just what had everyone seen that day? What were these bizarre creatures that were featured in these reports? Are these creatures something cryptozoological? Are they some kind of alien, ghost, or interdimensional being? It's impossible to know for sure what they are, and these strange blob-like creatures are sure to remain at the outer limits of the outlandishly weird, too inconceivable to categorize and clarify, enduring as perplexing enigmas that entertain as much as they confuse.